Hello kiddies, it's your Uncle Spurt here, and today we're going to be unboxing the Motorola Moto Edge 40, which at 529 British pound is almost 300 quid cheaper than the Edge 40 Pro. And yet it's still packed to the pits with premium features like a 144Hz POLED display, Dolby Atmos stereo speakers, some beefy Dimensity 8020 performance, 68 watt fast charging, and it's all wrapped up in a spoojerific design. So let's yank the Motorola Edge 40 out of its box, take you on a full-on tour of the camera, the gaming chops, all that good stuff. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! First of all, really like how the box and myself are matching. Clearly it was meant to be. And don't worry if you think the packaging looks a bit crappy, it's because it's good for the environment. Very much not like myself. So first up, what's inside? Well, you've got one Motorola Edge 40. And to protect that phone, you've got an exceedingly rigid case. Got yourself a 68 watt power adapter. Oh wait, is that an 89 watt power adapter? No, I'm pretty sure it's 68. And yes, some USB Type-C cable action. So that right there is the box. Now let's check out the phone. Now I really like the design of the more premium Motorola smartphones because they feel refreshingly skinny and lightweight. It's still an almighty 6.55 inch bugger, slightly more compact than that Pro model, but it doesn't feel quite as bulky and cumbersome as some flagships. For one, that screen pretty much fills the entire front end, very weeny bezels, and as you can see there, that panel slopes off around the edges of the display as well. Gotta say, I'm not a massive fan of those curved displays though, because it can kind of balk the responsiveness at times, which it does seem to do here on the Motorola Edge 40. As you can see, if you're just clutching it just that little bit too tightly, in not quite the right way, then occasionally your taps and pokes and such forth just don't register. Yeah, very skinny frame there on the Motorola Edge 40. It's an aluminium frame, adding to the premium look and general vibe. One thing I'm certainly not a fan of is the power button because it barely presses in at all. So sometimes you'll tap it thinking you've hit it, but then you're not entirely sure. So you'll double tap it and then you'll just switch the thing off again. Although it seems to be getting less stiff the more I handle it. So that's a thing. And then you've actually got a choice of designs for the back end. This is the vegan leather backing, sadly not leather made from vegans. It's kind of hard to tell, certainly from a distance. You have to peer at it quite close to see that sort of leathery pattern. Certainly here on this Eclipse Black model, it might be a bit more obvious on the Nebula Green version. That means that back end is soft to touch and also adds a good bit of grip as well. I would say though, if you're tempted by the leathery back, then maybe try and grab the green model rather than this black one because it is an absolute dust magnet. Seriously, I'm just staring at it and just watching all these little white specks just bloody materialize on the thing. So if you're OCD about keeping things clean, then this is basically your worst nightmare in pocket form. And if you're perhaps not sold by the leathery option, well, you can also grab the Motorola Edge 40 in a Lunar Blue acrylic version. Motorola didn't specify whether it was Gorilla Glass protecting the front end of the Moto Edge 40. What I do know is there's definitely no screen protector on there, but this phone is IP68 water and dust resistant. Now another good reason to bag yourself a Motorola blower is the fact that you get an enjoyably stock Android experience on here. It is of course the latest freshest Android 13, and you'll see the UI very similar to what you'll find on the likes of a Pixel smartphone. However, Motorola does thrust a few of its own features onto its phones, most of which you'll find squirreled away in this here Moto app. So for instance, while Android is pretty tight when it comes to security and privacy tools, you've also got the Moto Secure editions, including the likes of the PinPad Scramble. This does exactly what you would expect, jumbling up those numbers when you're tapping in your pin so no one can squint over your shoulder and memorize it. Or at least they'll have to be paying pretty bloody close attention. You've got plenty of other bonuses chucked on here as well, including a dedicated gaming mode, more on that in a bit. And Ready For, which is particularly nifty if you want to stream your apps or games or whatever to a telly. So for instance, I can stream to my LG TV here. This works with any of your apps, so you can stream a bit of Disney Plus for instance, or of course some hot Uncle Spurt action. Woofed. And it's reasonably good news on the software update front as well, because Google reckons it'll bung you 2 Android OS updates, so Android 14 then Android 15, and 3 years of security updates. So this phone isn't going to be one to chuck in the bin after just a year or two. On the somewhat sexy subject of connectivity, you've got full 5G support here, of course, like pretty much every phone these days, and Wi-Fi 6 action as well. And the Motorola Edge 40 also supports eSIM as well as physical SIM. And while it looks like you've got a double-sided SIM tray here, that second one is a big fat nope. Can't put anything in here, buddy. Don't even try it. And in the equally sexy subject of storage, you've got 256 gigs as standard on the Motorola Edge 40, about 13 gigs of which is used up by system shenanigans. But yeah, no micro SD memory card support. Don't even try and put one in that second slot. Ugh. Now, although the 6.55-inch display is slightly smaller here on the regular Motorola Edge 40 versus the Pro, it's still a proper stunner. So once again, a Full HD Plus P OLED display, so nice poppy colours, wide viewing angles, sharp contrast, deep blacks, crispy whites, all the good stuff. You've got HDR10 Plus support, no Dolby Vision this time around. Only a dinky wee selfie cam intruded on the action when you do go full screen, and this display tops off at 144Hz, doesn't quite reach the giddy heights of 165Hz like the Pro, but like my knackered old peepers could even tell the difference anyway. The Edge 40 still has most other flagship phones beat, as they tend to max out at around 120Hz, so yeah, everything is creamy smooth. Not the brightest panel around, it's not too bad on a sunny day, supposedly could be boosted past 1000 nits. But a lot of other flagships do go brighter. But overall, the Moto Edge 40 should satisfy most cinephiles out there. And as well as spaffing out crispy, colourful visuals, the Motorola Edge 40 also sports a stereo speaker setup. Let's check it out.
The hungover coronation special. Oh, hang on. Some rich bloke's been made the king of us all, so it's the perfect time to rejoice and reflect on what makes being British so bloody brilliant. Things like
And yeah, that's a decent sounding stereo arrangement, even if the top speaker a little bit more tinny, not quite as loud as that bottom speaker. It's certainly loud enough to cut through quite a bit of background shenanigans, and the audio quality is still decent even when you boost it up to the maximum volume. Sadly, however, there is bugger all headphone jack here on the Motorola Edge 40. But the Bluetooth 5.2 wireless streaming support seems dependable enough so far, and you've got full Dolby Atmos support too. Now, while the Motorola Edge 40 Pro was powered by Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which is basically stuffed inside of all the super premium flagship smartphones this year, the Motorola Edge 40 goes with a more affordable option, the MediaTek Dimensity 8020. It's actually the pioneer for this chipset because it hasn't been bunged in anything else before. And yeah, while the 8020 can't exactly match the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 when it comes to sheer grunt, it's still a perfectly fine, capable performer. Perfectly respectable Geekbench scores, even if it can't reach the giddy heights of that Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, and certainly I found the everyday performance absolutely fine. No buggering about or hanging around when you tap an app, it just loads up. And if you are a gaming fan, well, no worries, the Motorola Edge 40 happily handled Genshin Impact, even with the maxed out graphic settings. Yeah, it wasn't super fluid. Yeah, the frame rate did often dip down to about sort of 20-30 FPS when shit got a bit crazy, but it was still perfectly playable. And if you do want a more fluid experience, well, just bump down the graphics to around sort of the medium level and you'll maintain a 60 frames per second rate, no worries. I did notice after about an hour of gaming that the top end of the Motorola Edge 40 was starting to get quite toasty, but it didn't seem to impact performance, and it wasn't so hot that my fingers were melting or anything like that. Screen is perfectly responsive and everything too, and of course you've got that Motorola gaming mode as well, which is really handy, can block notifications and calls so you don't get distracted. You've got that high performance mode as well, which definitely comes in handy with memory guzzling titles like Genshin. You can also record the action and tweak the screen sensitivity if it's not quite to your liking. Now, the Motorola Edge 40 sports a 4,400 mAh capacity battery, so only a wee bit smaller than that Pro model, not too shabby at all. Especially considering how deliciously slender this phone is. Of course, if you lean hard on the Moto Edge 40, it'll probably be wiped out before you crawl into bed at night, so don't go too crazy. Or if longevity is a major factor for you, you might want to look elsewhere. That said, Motorola has slapped that 68 watt turbo power charging onto the Edge 40. So if you do find yourself running dry, just bung a cable in its bottom for about 20 minutes or so and it'll be juiced right up again. And for an extra bit of convenience and flexibility, you also have 15 watt wireless charging. So regrettably, it's almost time to finish this lovely Motorola Edge 40 unboxing, but first a quick squint at the optics. And what's slapped on the back here is a dual lens setup. That's right, just the two lenses. No macro or monochrome bollocks, any of that, just the primary and the ultra wide. I rather like the Motorola camera app because it's very simple and straightforward, easy to use with just a single hand as well. You've got Motorola's usual AI smarts, which will suggest swapping to a different mode when applicable. Usually does a pretty decent job of it as well. And the likes of the night mode are also handled on your behalf. There is a pro mode if you do want to tinker with the settings. You can actually shoot in RAW format with this as well, but I'd say the Moto Edge 40 is better suited to anyone who just can't be arsed with anything more than pointing and shooting. And here's just a selection of sample shots that I snapped around the homestead over the past 24 hours with the Moto Edge 40. Seems to handle annoying, tricky lighting and sharp contrast and things like that without too much bother. The shutter speed is nice and nippy, which definitely helps with living subjects. The only real problem I've had while shooting is that sometimes because of that curved display, if I'm clutching the phone particularly tight and trying to take a photo, sometimes the shutter just will not react. So I've got to adjust my grip and try again. If you attempt to shoot something that's living and breathing in more ambient conditions, you might well get some blur, unfortunately. But apart from that, my lower light shots came out pretty nicely without too much noise and grain creeping in there. And if you want to get a little bit more funky, well, you've got that 13 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter. And this is also used for macro snaps if you want to get in super close. Don't mind me, Veronica, just capturing your beautiful eyes. Swap to video and things are pretty limited, to be perfectly honest. You can shoot full HD footage at 30 or 60 frames per second, but if you want to shoot 4K, well, that's 30 FPS only. And again, as long as you're not shooting in particularly low light, then you'll generally get decent results from the Moto Edge 40. Plenty of crisp detail, some natural looking colours, decent image stabilisation, and no issues with the audio pickup. And then the final camera lens here on the Motorola Edge 40 is a 32 megapixel selfie shooter. And that's certainly more than enough megapixels for this face, that's for sure. And in good light, you do get plenty of detail in more ambient conditions. Still reasonably bright and not too noisy. You got all the usual portrait smarts, etc. And hey, you can once again shoot 4K Ultra HD footage using that front-facing camera as well. The mics are pretty good. I believe it's a triple mic setup here on this smartphone, so can capture you clearly no matter how you're holding the smartphone, and also capture a good bit of ambient noise all around you. And that right there, in a tasty wee nutshell, is the Motorola Edge 40, which, as you can see, if you want to save some cash over that Pro model, not too many sacrifices beyond the slightly pared down performance and a couple of other wee bits. Certainly if you're looking for an upper mid-range to flagship style experience with that stock Android vibe, well, it's definitely worth considering. But of course, strong competition on the way from the likes of Google's Pixel 7a. Stay tuned for more on that bad boy. It'd be great to hear your own thoughts on the Motorola Edge 40. Do you think it's worth stumping up some cash for? It'd be great to hear your thoughts down below. Please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech. And have yourselves a really wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everyone. Love you.